Okay, so it's April, mid-April 2016, 18th April actually. And we've all had the booklets through the doors in the UK about the EU referendum and how the government would like us to crack on with voting in favour of what they want. And there's people complaining about the 9 million they've spent on the booklets. Yeah, I suppose that is a bit of an issue, but we shouldn't get distracted by that because it's less than nothing in the big scheme of things. First thing to look for in the booklet, as in if you're doing a critique of anything, is what's not there. Really, it's the most important thing. So what's not in the booklet? There's a couple of things not there. As always with the Tories, there's a big thing made about benefits. Okay? And just to kick off with the position of benefits, surely nobody disagrees that anybody who shouldn't be getting them, if people shouldn't be getting them, then that's just it. You shouldn't be getting them. If there's tax credits and you shouldn't be getting them, then that's just it, unless the law is changed or something. Yeah. And if it's too unfavourable, then we would expect people to vote for a government that gave a more favourable system, provide a more favourable system. The fact that this government has Ian Duncan Smith, the guy in charge of tax credits, sorry, not tax credits, the benefit system, resigning, is not a good sign in that regard. There is something adrift. We just aren't exactly sure what it is. But on the EU front, what's missing? Okay, tax credits. They talk a lot about benefits, but they don't actually say, they use two phrases which are a bit worrisome. One is benefits. They talk about EU people and other migrants being able to, it being harder for them to get benefits and also to be on the welfare system. And it's not exactly clear whether that includes tax credits or not. It's sufficiently vague that it certainly doesn't answer any questions. It probably raises questions rather than answers them. So let's clear up a couple of things about tax credits. First of all, people are saying that we pay 35 billion, or is it 45 billion? It's 45 billion, I think, they're saying we pay to the EU. They're talking about so and so many million a week or something, 350 million every whatever it is. But they're talking about 45 billion a year. And then people are saying we get half of that back or 2/3 of it back. But of course it's got a little tag on it saying what we can spend it on. And so in effect we're taxed to the tune of 15 billion a year or something. But that's not really a full picture of the cost of being in the EU. The tax credits bill has shot up from 2011 being 13 billion or 11 billion or something in 2011. I think it's 13 billion. It's tripled in the 5 years since. We're now in 2016. And yes, there's a little bit of people moving from one kind of benefit to another because it's so difficult to ESA and JSA and there's lots of conditions. Yeah, but mostly people who aren't in work at all will still tend to try and get those benefits. And people who are in some kind of employment will be looking to get on tax credits. And universal credit, of course, is coming in. My point to you is that tax credits bill, I suggest to you that of the current 33 billion, 35 billion I think it is, of the current 30 odd billion in tax credits, there is, I would say, about 20 billion of it, at least, more than half, 2/3 perhaps, a lot of money, is actually going to people who aren't Indigenous British people with a British passport. Let's call Indigenous people British passport holders. Okay? Because if you're going to stay for any length of time, you're getting a British passport. Not getting an NI number. Just because you apply for an NI number, that doesn't say to me you want to stay here for any length of time. So I'm going to call people with a British passport Indigenous British people. So it doesn't matter whether you're Muslim, you're black, you're Chinese, you are white, Christian, none of that. Hindu, none of that matters. All I'm saying is if you get a British passport, I'm going to call you one of the indigenous peoples. All right? So, if 20 odd billion is going to either Eastern European migrants like Polish people, who are self-employed doing whatever, it might be building work, it might be office work, I don't know. The same as anybody else, really. It's interesting that the government is not willing to mention that in the same breath. You see, the government's actually trying to hide how much tax credits money goes to EU migrants. And by migrants, I don't really mean migrants. Migrant to me says you're staying forever. It's actually visitors in a way. But these visitors get national insurance numbers and work for as long as they like. And then the government's fallen over itself. So let me just finish that off. So the government admits that 45 billion goes towards the EU every year, and then we get some of it back. Okay. But what it doesn't mention that there's another 20 billion. That's another 50% virtually. Another 50%, taken up to 65 billion, maybe 70 billion, that we're paying out because we're in the EU. Only because we're in the EU, we're paying out to other people who don't hold British passports for tax credits. Forget benefits, because they're a relatively small amount of money because it's so difficult to get them. And nobody's going to come over here to sign on the dole, but they might come over here to get tax credits. So there's that. So the government straight away is telling me a bit of a massive fat fib. It's saying that there's 45 billion or so going into the EU coffers every year, when in fact we're having to pay out altogether another 20 or 25 billion, taking it up to 65, 70 billion overall, because we're in the EU. The conditions mean that if we pay tax credits, they have to go to people from Poland and other places in Europe, Latvia and any other EU migrants. And if we accept, of course, a load of migrants who have been rubber stamped in at Greece, and these Muslim refugee type migrants who are completely dubious origin, nobody's really said that they're 100% sure these people are and where they come from, and that they are actually fleeing for their lives, and that they won't be trouble or anything. Nobody said anything to that effect. So those people, if they get rubber stamped in Europe through some slack process because they just want to get it over with and get those people out of town in Greece or wherever, in Macedonia or wherever, if that's just a rubber stamp job, those people can come over here in Britain after X amount of time, and they've got an EU passport, and they'll be claiming tax credits. So that's more non-passport holders, non-British passport holders, claiming tax credits. So there's a massive lie right there. They're just not mentioning it. Another thing that's a bit irritating is that the government, the British government, the Tory government, have rushed out. As soon as the EU vote was kind of announced, within, well, very soon, they rushed out to make a bilateral agreement between Britain and Poland, so that UK would pay out still tax credits to Polish people, even if the UK votes to leave the EU. Now, why would a government rush to do that? The government has rushed to do that to try and put people who are voting in the position where they think, oh God, even if I vote to leave the EU, there's no point, because we're still going to pay that tax credits bill of 25 or 20 billion or whatever to Eastern European migrants. Migrants, you know. I'm not sure migrant's a good word, but anyway. So the government's kind of fallen over itself in a very unseemly fashion to go and get this bilateral agreement in place. It's a little bit naughty. It's a little bit underhand. And it's prone to making people think, oh, what the heck, what's the point in voting? Which would suit the government. Remember, if you don't vote, that may be helpful to the government. That may count in some ways as a 50% vote for remaining. There's some ways of looking at it that suggest that if people don't vote, the kind of people who don't vote might be helpful to the government or not. I don't know what the government's analysis is. It's by no means clear that a demographic of a certain type, like blue collar or middle class or affluent or poor, it's no means clear who's going to vote for what. So they got a bilateral agreement that fell over themselves to make with Poland to try and make people think that there's no way out of the tax credits bill for Eastern Europeans, even if we vote to get out of the European Union. This isn't true, of course. And here's the biggest thing of all, really. What if we don't want to stay in the European Union as it is, and we don't want to leave the European Union because everyone's going to have a bit of a dig at us and say, well, they can't give us the same deal as when we were in. So neither of those two options is very good. What if we want a third option? Okay? What if we like to have massive reforms? Okay, here's where my other point comes in. We should treat the European Union as an operating system. And you're going to say, oh, that sounds technical. You already know about operating system. Anyone watching this knows about operating systems. You're either on an Apple device, which uses iOS, or you are on a PC, which uses Windows, or you might use Linux or something like that. But here's my point. Linux is a very basic system. Here's my point. You've got effectively what the EU is a framework against which all the countries work. If you treat all the EU countries as being a piece of hardware, say that Britain is the equivalent of an iPad, the latest all-flying, all-doing iPad, and that Germany is the equivalent of a powerful top-end PC, and that France is the equivalent of an iPad mini or iPad Air or something. Do you get the picture? You treat them as being equivalent to hardware platforms, and you treat the European Union agreement that everyone signs up to as being a kind of operating system. And that is actually what it is. It's the backdrop against which everything else works. So what we need is not to lose our operating system, the European system, not to be forced to sign up to it again, but we need a third way. What is the third way? A new operating system. We need a rival to the current operating system in Europe, the current framework. And the best thing we could do is start to form up with countries within the European bloc to say, look, what's going on is pretty poor. We don't actually want it. We just want a trading partnership and not to face barriers all the time. And we're not going to subsidise certain kinds of communities all the time. And we're not going to pay tax credits out to people who don't hold a British passport, for example. Why don't Polish people get Polish handouts? The answer, of course, is they're not as generous as British handouts. But British handouts are made for a British situation. And the reason they're being raked to pieces now is because the government's saying they're no longer going to British passport holders. And therefore, we're in a situation where we're having to tailor our handouts to suit a Europe, not to suit a Britain. Okay. We need a new operating system entirely. A low, basic version that everyone would sign up to and wouldn't involve us giving over tax credits and benefits and all that. Surely they should get benefits from their own country based on whatever job they have here. They should get the benefits from back in their own country. And if they weren't entitled to them there, they shouldn't be entitled to them here. And we should have the point system like Australia have, and we should be able to say who we want in and who we don't. And maybe you get extra points for being a European Union citizen. Look, my point is, none of this is rocket science. This is all totally straightforward. Like, when you go to Australia, you get extra points for being married. Go to Canada, you get extra points for being married. Why not just give somebody a bunch of points, like 20 points, for being from the European Union? And that will go towards them coming here, but it won't be everything. They've still got to have a job, and they've got to have some skills we need, and so on and so forth. Does that not make a lot of sense? We need a new operating system and not be forced into getting out of the current one completely or staying in the current one that we don't want to do. We need the middle road, the third way, which is a new operating system, a new way of working, a lightweight way of working that doesn't tie us down to doing all sorts of stuff that we don't want to do. Stuff we design for Britons are for Britons. And if Polish people's system isn't very good, that's not our problem. It really isn't. And I'm mentioning the Poles, but it could be anybody. So that's it, really. It's not at all complicated. Just a new system, a new way of working. One final point. What we should really do is stay in the current system and change it all round and put people like Merkel on the witness stand, in the dock, for what she's done, telling everybody to come on in, the water's fine. I mean, what a dumb cough. Honest to God, honest to God, if we had laws like Germany, I couldn't even say that about Merkel. She doesn't have the right to do that. She's brought them into the heart of Germany. Immigrants that had no checks done, they just broke through the barriers, got on a train, and she allowed them into the heart of Europe. The heart of Germany is the heart of Europe, physically and in other ways. She had no right to actually say that. She should be in the dock, Angela Merkel, for what she did. And if we could stay and have major changes and put people like Angela Merkel in the dock for saying stupid stuff she had no right to do, that's a Europe we're staying in. Perhaps the ballot paper should really say, do you want major reforms to the European Union before we stay in? But it isn't rocket science. If there was the political will, it could happen. Maybe in the end, Britain has to take a short-term whipping so that we can come out and say to everybody, look, all you that are stuck in, we've got a new version that we'd like to put forward. How about you all join this and we all go to ditch that because ours will be cheaper and more simple. How about that? And if the Tories weren't so anti-Europe, they might come up with something like this themselves. Everyone's getting an axe to grind. I don't. I'm happy to be part of Europe politically in other ways, but not joined at the hip. And we needed major reforms. And why should we pay out handouts designed for Britons to other people? Let other people have their handouts that have been signed by their countries. There's nothing unfair about that. Thanks for watching and listening.